Happy Thursday, everybody. I'm glad to see that you're here. I've been looking at the list, and there's some really incredible people here. Some of you may wonder why we're doing this, and I think there's a few reasons, but the Dolby Atmos system seems to be on everybody's mind lately. You're seeing it all over the place, and people want to know more about it, and there's nobody better than Paul Novotny to explain that. So I'm just gonna, okay, that's good. So you can download the PDF of this so you don't have to make notes. That's the URL there, entertainmentmarketer.com/downloads. Okay, that'll be there for a couple of months. And there's a few other things there that are useful as well. We're going to conduct a couple of polls in a minute, find out more about you. And anytime during the presentation, you can go into the Q&A. It's at the bottom of your screen. There's a little question mark, and you can ask questions. We're going to leave the answering of those till the end, until Paul has finished his presentation, but you can put them in there anytime you want. This will be recorded. You will get an email afterwards with the location of the recording, so you can download that and watch it anytime you want. One important point is that when you experience any kind of educational program, whether it's in person or online, it's important that you do some follow-up. So in other words, if you've learned some things today, which you will, you have to figure out what you're going to do about it. That's the important thing, because it's very easy to put a whole bunch of stuff in your brain, and by Monday it's just in there with everything else. So the key is, within a day, sit down and say, okay, here's 5 things we're going to do that, I'm going to do that I never did before, and then you get some value out of it. And it might be one of the points that Paul made here about the equipment, or it could be the learning curve. Maybe you want to do some more learning. Maybe you've decided I'm going to go ahead with it and build the studio. But whatever it is, make sure that you transfer it, I guess, into an action plan. That's the key. Okay, so where are my polls here? Just a sec. There they are. Okay, the first thing we'd like to know is where you're from. So you can just answer it there. I've divided up into Western Canada, Ontario, Quebec, Eastern Canada, United States, and foreign. Most of it not a surprise, so I will publish that. Okay, so you should be able to see what the response is to that. Mostly Ontario, of course, but we're really happy to see 19% outside of United States and Canada. That's amazing. Okay, second question we have of you. You didn't know you'd have an exam here. And these are multiple choice, so you can choose more than one. So go through and pick the ones, a lot of you do a lot of things. Okay, so yeah, pretty not surprising. 51% musicians, that's great to see. With, of course, the Dolby Atmos studio, it's within the reach of musicians who have some money, have a good part-time job. Okay, I'd like to thank our sponsors who helped us put this together. Pro Audio Spotlight, which is one of our websites, Isoacoustics, Bryston, Audient, Merging Technologies, and PSB. So yeah, they've all helped us by promoting this, and Paul will explain his relationships with these companies as well. Okay, so the chat appears to be working as well. So if you want to introduce yourself, or as we get into this, there may be other things that you might want to say. You might want to share your email address. We'll just, see what that is, but it is working and it's there. Q&A. Yeah, we just got some general questions in there, but you can ask questions as we go along. There we go, and the chat's coming up. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. Okay, I'm here, and I'm going to go over here. And I just have to find old Paul here. I lost him for a minute. There he is. Okay. He should magically appear in a few seconds. Lots of people receiving the chats I see, which is great. And Paul's little face should show up any minute. While he does, I'll just speak here for a moment about how I met Paul. It was suggested by a longtime friend and industry wise person, Dave Dysart, about 6-8 months ago, that Paul was worth doing a article on, and I'd certainly heard of him. There he is. There's his smiling face. So I'd certainly heard of Paul, but I didn't really know much about him. So, but I believe for many years, Dave Dysart's been our go-to person for recording and broadcast. And that just means that anything we don't know about, we go and ask Dave. And he usually either has the answers or knows where to find them. So he said, well, you got to do something on the Paul Novotny. He's just an interesting guy. So I did a bit of research before I wrote the story. So I found out a lot of things. I found out he was an incredible bassist, and continues that. Producer, owns his own record label, is a scholar. In fact, at that time, he was working on his PhD. So he's got a whole shitload of letters after his name. He had to widen his business card to get that on there. He is a educator as well, so he teaches. And he's definitely one of the world's leading experts on Dolby Atmos. So we did an interview. We had a good time, and I learned a lot of things, and got the story together. And it's if you go to proaudiospotlight.com and just search for his name, you won't find too many other Novotnys on there. Then you'll find the story, and it's definitely an interesting interview. So you should definitely do that. So the thing that occurred to me while I was researching this is, aside from all these skills that Paul has, he must be awfully good at time management. And I asked him that, and he said, well, I've never really been asked that before. But I said, how can you possibly do all those things, and not only do them, but do them all well? That, because there's lots of people who do a lot of things, but they don't do them particularly well. And then have time for your family. He said, well, I've never been asked that before either. So I was impressed by that, aside from everything else. So after that, we talked a bit about it and decided that this would be a great idea to share his knowledge in general, but specifically of Dolby Atmos with the industry out there. So we've had an incredible response. We've got, I actually had to upgrade my webinar platform today because it was over our limit, which is good. That's a good sign. So I hope you're ready. As I say, you can get the PDF, but make whatever notes you want. And I will turn it over to Paul right now, and he's got a credible PowerPoint to share with you.
Thank you, Jim. That was a lovely introduction. I'm humbled, and I'm really happy to be speaking to all of you today and telling you about what it is that I've been up to. So just let me share my screen here. Okay. Okay, so I'm hoping you can all see that, and can you hear me still? Jim, you hearing me? You seeing my screen share? Just want to double check. Oh,
Hear your golden voice.
Sorry, what was that?
Hear your golden voice.
Okay, you can hear it. You can see the screen. We're good to go?
Good.
All right. So I know your time is valuable today, so I want to move through this in an organized fashion. And so what you can expect is it's going to be about a 45-minute presentation. And essentially what we'll do is questions after, so I can get through it. And so here we go. Bottom line is that I'm doing a PhD at York University in musicology and music technology. And my topic is 3D immersive audio in Dolby Atmos. And so essentially, this is what I would call a journey from two-dimensional music, stereo, to the third dimension of music, which we can now enjoy in this format. My work sits at the intersection of musicology and music technology. And I think that's an important place to locate this discussion because as creators, engineers, musicians, we're the humans in the room that must actually make decisions about the what, the when, the where, the why, and the how of how we essentially create a listening experience. And doing that in 3 dimensions is incredibly powerful compared to 2 dimensions. So let's just be clear. Stereo is 2-dimensional. It gives us width and it gives us depth, but it does not really give us height. But with 3-dimensional audio, we now have the ability to experience height. And I'm just going to move forward. So when we listen to music, it's a very different experience when we listen to music in Dolby Atmos. And so with that, what I would ask you, if you're so inclined, is to take a picture of this Q&R code. And if you're on Apple Music, I have put together a very, very strong, what I consider to be the strongest representation of music that's recorded in Dolby Atmos. You can start listening to this. I update this list regularly, and it's really a list that I use for all of my analysis of 3-dimensional music. So please take a picture of that while you can. I'm not sure how long this Q&R code will last, so get it up there and log in and get that playlist into your own playlist if you're on Apple Music. And I think you'll be very impressed with how it plays binaurally in stereo headphones through the Apple Spatial Audio. Okay, I'm going to move on. All right, I want to introduce this concept of the Dolby Atmos Hyper Near Field Tiny Studio. Now, that's a bit of a crazy name. So what does it mean? I thought about it quite a bit. Hyper near field basically means speakers are placed hyper near to a single hyper-tuned mix position. Tiny Studio basically means that wherever possible in this philosophy for building this room, I wanted to study or apply philosophies from the global tiny home movement. Now, this philosophy and this benchmark has been published by Routledge, Taylor Francis, in their book, Innovation in Music 2022. It's available if you go to on Amazon.ca, et cetera, and it will tell you, it's about a 7,000 word chapter that I wrote on how I did that, and it'll give you all of the details. This presentation is an overview, but I'm spoiling my own presentation by looking at this response curve. This is a curve that was done on December 19th, 2023 by a veteran electroacoustician by the name of Ed Segrin. He and I have become quite good friends, and we were both pretty astounded when we saw this rune curve. Now, this is a natural curve, meaning there's no Dolby music curve or cinematic curve applied to it. It's quite flat, and it's the basis for why I believe that this philosophy and benchmark really can work well for independent music creators who want to put three-dimensional music studios in their home at an economical price, but know that they have really good translation. So, what were my goals? Well, I wanted to establish the philosophy and the benchmark ethos. So, essentially what we're dealing with here are economical efficacy, environmental small scale, large operational scope, premium quality. The room is hyper-tuned to one sweet spot, and the outcome we're seeking is accurate translation to the mainstream music market and other larger studios. The other thing that I really wanted to do with this, because the Atmos format is nascent. It's very new. Music in Atmos only started in 2019. So this philosophy and benchmark is meant to encourage audio music technology manufacturers to involve this ethos and design bespoke products for rooms of this size. And that is actually starting to happen on its own. Let's just think about why we're doing this, because what does the 7.14 Atmos music listener experience provide? Well, it basically gives us, in an optimal way, a really immersive and vivid experience in music, and that ends up generating deep visceral emotions. It engages the listener to flow with music's moment and all of the many subjective meanings that are in music. What's amazing is that the mobile binaural headphone rendering is improving rapidly. So the way I think of this is now, as music producers and as engineers, we can take our 3D spaces to many different places. The music business argument is that this area is burgeoning, and the format is relatively well established right now. And what I do like about Dolby Atmos is that it's compatible with legacy Dolby formats. So just to give you an indication of the growth of this format, when I started researching this and building this studio back in 2020 at the beginning of the pandemic, there were only about 30 studios worldwide. But in a recent discussion that Ed Segrin and I had with Emma Brooks at Dolby, it sounds like in 2024, there's well over 1,000 studios now. So it's growing. So with that, though, independent music creators need frugal solutions. I mean, global real estate and rent is essentially very expensive, as we all know. So who is this ethos and philosophy and benchmark for? So it's for professional creators, schools, established music studios that want to expand to Atmos effectively and economically. But until I did this research, I could not find, so I'm presuming there was no documentation that existed for a tiny premium 7.14 Atmos music room that achieved Dolby's playback specs reliably. This ethos supports the current sort of socio-cultural situation that the world is in, where teleworking and online education, audio, video, music production is all happening now from within residential spaces. Residential space music production is happening with the best engineers. There's a picture of Daniel Lanois and Andrew Shep's studio, but many Atmos practitioners are doing this work out of spaces that they've built in their home. So why did I even think that this could work? Well, you know, the tradition of mobile recording trucks, broadcast control rooms, et cetera, showed me that the, how should I say, the best practices of acoustical room design have always been challenged in making these sorts of small rooms. They all have a big enemy, and that is standing waves. And I'm going to tell you how I dealt with that in this room, because I definitely had them too. And in the paper, I go into some detail about the My Room principle, which is in this picture in the lower left. And that was quite informative to see how they had handled the acoustics of that room. So how we do this? Let's have a look. We know our project intention is to establish a philosophy and benchmark for a premium sounding room. My methodology was to examine the literature, because I'm doing a PhD, implement it, test it, adjust, re-implement, and test over and over and over again. So some of my sort of scholarly heroes on this: Philip Newell, Floyd Toole, Alton Everest, Kenneth Pullman, ASE Library, Sound on Sound magazine has some great helpful advice. But there was a lot of professional support from Facebook groups, which I call the Metaversity. Two specific Facebook groups: Atmos Music Mixing Professionals and Atmos Post Mixing Professionals. This is where, in my opinion, the day-to-day breakthroughs are coming to light. This is where the practitioners who are in the hot seat working with this format are sharing and discussing what's going on. So I've been an avid follower of both of those groups, and many here I think are in those groups too. So let's be very clear. The room function of this size of room is sole operator. And that's a very big differentiation from other Atmos rooms. Sole operator, music, audio composition, mix, and master. So when I defined that scope, there were 5 questions that came to mind. Number 1, I really had to know whether or not a hyper near field tiny studio classification is even a viable concept. Will this work? Will it read? Will it translate? So that meant figuring out how, where, by how much I could take the Dolby Atmos best practices guideline and adapt them, and how we can adapt those things to overcome physical obstacles. Physical obstacles are always a problem in the build of any room, and it always takes intuitive and creative ways to take what are the conventions of the scholarship of room acoustics to overcome those. I had to ask what tools and components are required to meet the specifications, and most importantly, where and what are the economic differences that can be found between a larger Dolby Atmos near field studio and a smaller hyper near field studio. So the context is that the Dolby Entertainment Studio Certification Guide does not describe or even encourage room sizes below 50 square meters. And so this project takes that on and challenges it. It also, the context involves, as I said, adopting philosophies from the tiny home movement. And so what I decided would be, my goals in this area would be a large operational scope in a small scale with premium quality components, economy of scale for sure, low energy consumption. I wanted to create a cozy environment. I wanted to, where possible, buy local, and basically think about a repair and reuse philosophy for the future, because An Atmos studio, I think, is a form of technological luthiership. Things break and you have to repair them. So I really wanted to make sure that I could keep the studio running while something else was out being repaired. That was on my radar. The basic tools for this job have to start with the Dolby Audio Room Design tool, which is called DART. I tried a few sort of MacGyvering apps and things like Clap IR to give me an indication of what my reverb time was. So that's called RT60. And it was actually kind of effective, this little app, Clap IR, on my iPhone. I used Room EQ Wizard smart software. Actually, it was Ed that introduced the smart software. But SonarWorks was really, and continues to be, a huge part of the tuning of this room. So you need to have a good quality sound pressure level meter, SPL meter, good quality tape measure or laser measure. And always what I tried to do was use premium quality materials and tools, right down to the solder, the wire, and the connectors. The basic skills that I brought to the table are very elementary carpentry skills and pretty elementary electrical and mechanical engineering skills. However, I did solder EDAX and made a full patch bay for this. And that was, as anybody who's done that before, a bit of a hair-pulling experience, but I got it done and all connections were good at the end. Patience. The final attributes of the room, this I would say is how it's turned out, is that it's a very well correlated room. Everything is timed well, the spectral responses. Even for the amount of money spent, the dynamic range is huge. Because this is located in my home, in my basement, my noise criterion, which is the inherent level of noise in the room, is low. It's actually lower than what Dolby says. They stipulate NC 25. Well, according to my measurements, I'm down about NC 20, which is very, very good. Now, I have a very short reverb time in this room because the room is so small. That's called RT60. And this is where I depart from the Dolby convention quite heavily. But as I've found out, many other music mixing engineers depart from that too. We like short reverb times in music mixing rooms. One of the things that is central to the success of this room in terms of eliminating standing waves at the mix position is single sub with very, very good bass management, which creates a strong in-phase mono bass, experience in the room. And essentially, with careful placement of the sub, minimal electronic room correction is required. So the room presents with very strong dimensional imaging in height. It has high impact, really high intelligibility. And there is a sense of strong lateral listener envelopment in the sides. They call that LEV. They are acousticians who design concert halls. There's also a very strong sensation of horizontal apparent source width. So this is how the room reads and presents. So you might say, okay, how do we do that? How much does it cost? Well, a room like this, depending on the decisions you made, can probably be done as inexpensively as 40 to 50K and, up to 80K. But this is much, much less than comparative to a near field room, which would be well into 6 digits. So let's just get a little more context here when we talk about tiny home equals tiny studio. Over my years as a creator, I have built 6 creator rooms, studios, and I have now decommissioned 5 of them. And I just want to say, I noticed that Terry Medwetic is in our audience. Terry has advised me and I have learned so much from this man and brought that forward. So strong shout out to Terry. But there's something that we all have to learn, and that is what goes up must come down. And when you decommission a studio, you learn about the decisions you made when you made it. So I really tried to bring that forward. So if we do a comparison in terms of percentage for the average size of a home to a tiny home, you can see here that a tiny home is about 75% smaller than an average home. Well, if I do a comparative of my Dolby Atmos sort of minimum guideline here of 50 square meters, my hyper near field tiny studio comes in at about 50% of that size. So that's an aggressive reduction in the size of the room. So I want to point out or bring your attention to the diagram on the left of the screen, which essentially shows my layout. Now, in the Dolby Atmos room design tool, they give you the option for either an equidistant speaker layout or an orthogonal layout. Well, I bent the rules here where I created what I would call an orthogonal layout, where I'm equidistant in the front, but it's more orthogonal in the sides and the rears. And you can see with those two green dots that are outside the square, I don't actually have the width in this room to be able to get those speakers as wide as Dolby would want them to be. So I have to have delays on those speakers. And obviously they're calibrated for their energy to sound, equal to the other speakers. I have a very low ceiling height being a basement, only 2 meters, and that's well below what Dolby wants. My width is not wide, but my length is good. My length is 4.7 meters. And as you can see, there's a door at the back of the room located centrally. And when Ed and I and others have listened in this room, we've realized that when that door stays open, it creates a lovely sort of bass trap where the real low frequency exhausts and goes into another room in the basement, doesn't come back in. So this is very, very helpful in terms of the way the room behaves and how it responds. Now let's go to the center of the screen and look at speaker to mix distance. This room places speakers 1.2 meters from the ear. According to DART, each channel requires about 120 watts into an 8 ohm speaker at 87 dB of sensitivity and 500 watts for the sub. So this room basically is sitting between 1,700 and 2,000 watts. But let's remember that more power is always better. And with that, I'm very excited to tell you about a new Bryston amplifier that will soon be landing in my studio. It's a Class D, and I believe it's going to be the gold standard for Atmos small room amps or even near field amps, because it's going to provide about 240 watts per channel. It is apparently, I haven't put it in yet. I'm waiting for it to arrive, but James Tanner and I have been discussing it for quite a while. It runs super cool, completely quiet. So it's the perfect amp for our situation. And as you can see with an amp, I'm using passive speakers, and we'll be getting to that in a second. All right. So if you're now going to start to digest all the information I've said, you may be saying to yourself, well, what's the first step of maybe one of those 5 steps that Jim mentioned earlier? Well, your first step is to go to the Dolby website and register that you want to build a room, download the Dolby Design Room tool, and look at the videos and learn how to use it and fully understand it. It's going to ask you for some basic information that you see here on the screen. I'm not going to read all of that. But when you place all of that information into the Dolby audio room design tool, be very careful to be accurate with your measurements if you're building a small room. The bottom line is you're building a ship in a bottle. And so what might have been acceptable in terms of slush, might we say, in a larger room of 3 or 4 inches, now you're down to millimeters in a room of this size. So the tighter you can be in your physical implementation of the room, the less electronic correction you're going to need. This isn't, I'm not going to get into the details of this, but this is what DART looks like. There's a lot of information. And you can see there's some learning ahead for you to understand what all of this means. So I'm just going to move through that because that's your homework. Here is a benchmark comparison between a Dolby near field room at specification and what the hyper near field looks like. So if we go at the very top, you put your eyes on minimum layout height, and you will see that I am at, with, speaker to floor. We always measure our speaker locations from the center of the grill, by the way. From the center of the grill, I'm 1.7 meters off the floor. And Dolby says that they want 2.4 meters. This completely breaks the rules. But I can tell you, I found a few ways around, and dimensional height separation is not a problem with this height in my experience. You can see that the minimum layout width is smaller. The length is smaller, but the room volume, that's the big one. I'm at 50%. And you can see that my speaker distance to mix position is far less. But that becomes our advantage, because when the speaker is that close, you can get the room to 85 dB plus 20 true peak for a lot less money. So right there is one golden thing for you to take away from this. You save a ton of money by putting these speakers that close. The other thing we have to do is we have to, in my opinion, and that of others, select one speaker brand. I selected the Canadian PSB speaker brand, and it led me to call Paul Barton, who I believe also is in our presentation today. And Paul and I spent hours on the phone. He was so generous with his time, really helped me to understand the relationships of speakers and rooms. I wanted to understand the ethos of his speakers, and he explained all sorts of things about his relationship with Dr. Floyd Toole, his mentor, who is a Canadian. When I found out the story, and it's well recounted in my chapter in Rutledge, there was just no way I was going to use another speaker. So they are beautifully tonally balanced, and they're perfectly sensitive for this room. They speak fast, and they provide for the ceiling very light and easy ceiling mounting, which is very, very difficult when you're considering how to put an Atmos room together. You don't want a speaker falling on your head. So the speaker sort of array radius of my room is approximately 2 meters, side to side, top to bottom, essentially. The thing that I really want to bring to your attention is Paul Barton's unique PSB passive subwoofer design. Think of this. He put a 10-inch speaker in a very elegant 4-inch deep chassis. And I said to Paul, how did you do this? And he said, oh, it was easy. I put the magnet in front of the cone. Now I'm a bass player, and I've been hauling large amps around for 40 years. And when he told me that, I went, this is amazing. I've got to experience this. That sub, because I could locate it so close to the front wall, was a game changer with regards to eliminating standing waves. And I could actually enter the data into Dart about the location of this sub and see Dart project the room modes diminishing as I placed that sub closer to the front wall. And in conversation, Paul said, well, if you want it even better, you could actually put it in the front, put it in the wall. And it is a speaker that is designed to be in wall. Now, this is an interesting discussion because Hyun Kook Lee from Huddersfield University, he's aware of my room, and I've sent him pictures and everything, because he said that curve is just too good for such a small room. How did you get around the room modes? Well, the bottom line is that all of the speakers are very close to the wall. I've eliminated the room from the equation. So with the sub, that's another big takeaway, and it's powered by a specific 500-watt PSB amp. So what this creates is a highly correlated physical speaker layout amounting to minimal amounts of electronic room correction. All of my amps and hardware are placed outside of the studio so that the noise from fans, et cetera, is gone. And also you eliminate heat, which means you don't have to run the air conditioning on very hot days. Air conditioning in Atmos studios can be a problem because it creates a lot of noise. So this is the simplest and the most effective way to get rid of that heat and that noise. I chose for my hardware merging technologies, Happy Mark II and Anubis. And the reason why, of all of the manufacturer manuals that I read, they were the only one to note that they focus their designs on low power consumption. So this fed right into my tiny home environmental philosophy, if you will. The Happy is modular with cards, so repairability is easy. The passive PSB speakers are economical because they are independently hung with normal speaker wire, so you don't have amplifiers and AC that you have to run. And because the PSB speakers are so close, you can achieve the actual energy level that the studio needs to have with a huge savings, which you will see. And that gives you the budget room to buy premium A to D, D to A hardware and power amps. So really, this exercise is very much about where you're going to place your emphasis economically. Now, part of my sort of physical room tuning, if you will, is I developed in Excel a speaker delay calculator based on speed of sound, distance, et cetera, et cetera. And you can see in the far right-hand column, that is Excel's calculations of all of the delay times for my speakers. You can see how close they are. They're down to very, very small increments. Well, in the merging technologies Anubis, I was able to enter those delay settings as I would say, a foundational layer of timing for the room. And what this meant is that when I implemented SonarWorks, which is the final room calibrator, if you will, which is done with a microphone and done with artificial intelligence, I believe it's a very clever system. It was able to build and better these delay settings because I gave it a foundation that was done very accurately. So that's another really big thing. Have your SonarWorks or whatever is going to supply your tuning curtain, have it be situated in your hardware, not on your computer. Anubis manages this incredibly elegantly. So in all Atmos rooms, we need to understand that there are chains of operation. We have an A chain, a B chain, and a QC chain. The A chain is the computer system, the Dolby renderer, the digital audio workstations, plugins. I use Virtuoso for my binaural rendering from APL Labs, Huddersfield. And in that system, the merging system requires Ravenna AES 67, which is an audio format, audio visual format, and it brings the studio to audio over Internet protocols. So all my hardware is connected to my computer using Ethernet cables, not USB or Thunderbolt or any of that stuff. The timing of the Ravenna AES 67 system is unparalleled in the industry, and it makes this room really fast and really crisp. You can use audio movers, Omnibus, or Listen to, or Loopback, and Apple Music can also be part of your system. The B chain, that's where you're outside of your computer, and now that's where your premium A to D, D to A is, your actual hardware like Anubis and Happy, but also, like I say, the AES Ravenna gives me 128 ins and 128 outs virtually. This is important for an Atmos studio to have. So out in the B chain, I've got my speakers, I've got my power amps, and my headphones. The QC chain is something that is expensive to put together, but most people these days, this is where we listen to other mixes by practitioners like Bob Clearmountain or Steve Genowick or Justin Gray. These are some of the or Andrew Sheps. These are some of the most eminent creators. Rich Chicky was here the other day. He's created some great mixes. These are the most eminent 3D music creators on the planet. Morten Lindberg, another great creator. But I need to listen to what they're doing and hear that on my system. So how I do that is with Apple Music, and I use Loopback, and that basically presents right into my system, and it sounds amazing. So that's quality control, B chain and A chain. So it's time for a summary here. I did some studying of online materials, basically by Brian Pennington, who's the senior field applications engineer at Dolby. I'm not going to read all of this, but the stuff in red is really what I want you to take away. With regards to your room size, too big can be problematic. He says not too big or too small, but now this benchmark tells us exactly how small, and that's really where I wanted to go with this. You need a rectangular long axis orientation to prevent loading the room with standing waves. Understand this, it's very liberating. Atmos works with all speakers, and price does not denote quality. The PSB speakers are not, in comparatively speaking to many other speaker brands that are used in Atmos, these are not expensive speakers, but they are beautiful sounding speakers and they work great. Strongly endorse them. You must use a good meter, slow and fast response with A and C weighting. I think we all need to understand what's a comfortable working level, in our day. So my comfortable working level, and I always work at 77 dBc. That means I can work a good 8 hours and not have ear fatigue. So when Ed and I tested the room, we pinked this room at 77 dBc, which is my preferred listening level. The room plays nicely at 85 and other levels. Setting up your LFE, it's very important to place it about 4 to 6 dB louder than the central channel. And as Ed and I, basically proved, you have to balance your low frequency energy, which is a specific track in the Atmos format, against all of your bass managed energy. Those two have to be very, very carefully lined up. Just remember this with regards to reverb time, RT60, too much reverb time in an Atmos room can lead to smearing and room modes that are unrepairable with electronic calibration. Also, holes in spatial dimension in your mixes can appear when you play that mix back in a small space, because that mix is relying on that RT60 from a larger space. And in a small space, you're not going to have it. That can affect how it's going to play in a cabin of a car. Atmos is coming to car cabins. So I believe that this small hyper near field convention is going to be very, very important as that comes along. It's how we can essentially get a sense of how our mixes will read in small spaces. But also you must remember, when you're working in a small space, too little room reverb can lead to you printing too much reverb in your mix, too much atmosphere, too much environment. But one thing I've learned in speaking with Rich Chicky and many others, most music mix engineers, unlike film post engineers, we like a drier, smaller size room because it reads with high intelligibility and high impact. One thing that is contentious, and I believe that we as music mixing engineers, we do not need to use the Dolby curve. Hardly any music mixers are using either the music curve or the cinematic curve. And the most essential thing is tune your room to one position. Most larger rooms, all larger rooms, will average their tuning. They might have 3 or 4 mics across a very wider sort of sweet spot. And that's great when you're in a very, very big room. But at the end of the day, you are operating with a sweet spot that is a little bit like an all-season tire. The hyper near field room gives you one specific hyper-tuned calibration that's like a high-performance summer tire. Pardon my car metaphors, but I like cars too. So that's kind of it. One last thing. You must always test your mixes when you're learning to mix in Atmos in other verified rooms, which I've done from this room. And my stuff reads really well in bigger rooms. So, yeah, I was really scared when I did my very first test and I saw this. It doesn't tell you much other than it's a pretty messy curve. It's very averaged, but I almost said, oh, this isn't going to work. So what did I do? I refined my speaker distances. I tested the PSB speakers, fully bunged, half bunged, no bung because they have ports in the back. I settled on no bung because the speakers respond with more sensitivity. They're faster and the system is just crisper, got more bounce to it. I tightened the physical system timing using the timing calculator. Very importantly, I will endorse the use of isoacoustic speaker pucks. I had some serious imaging problems in left, center, and right. And when I placed these pucks below those center speakers, I have a mantle. Oh my God. When I decoupled the speakers from what they were sitting on, the imaging in the front improved so much. So isoacoustic pucks and decouple all your speakers wherever possible. Very, very important. One of the big things I did for my room, I told you that I have a low ceiling. So what are we going to do with that? I was listening with my ears at about 51 inches. So I said, well, supposing I lower my chair. And I did to 48 inches. And I lowered the entire standard 7-speaker mid-plane by that 3 inches as well. And that was just one way that I could achieve more dimensional separation between the ear level standard mid-plane speakers and the height. And it worked really, really well. Not one engineer has complained about lack of dimensional separation between the height and the mid-plane. The imaging is very, very tight. There's a few other things I did. You can get the PowerPoint, so I'm not going to go through all of these. So let's move on. And there's the curve that we ended up with. And this is with SonarWorks in. But SonarWorks is resting on that bed that I pre-calibrated, both timing-wise and level-wise. And then SonarWorks took it the rest of the way. Here, we're going to close on the economics. Okay, this is an estimate. Near field basically can involve a speaker system that's powered, speaker brand of a level of ATC, PMC, whatever. Look at the cost of all those speakers that you've got. You can look at the other things too, but I really want you to look at those speakers and compare to this. Look at the passive loudspeakers. Basically $3,500, $4,000 with passive loudspeakers compared to about $124,000. That's why you can invest in a Bryston amplifier. That's why you can invest in Merging Technologies hardware, which really, really give you your clarity and your impact. And essentially, all the other areas, you can study it on your own when you get the PowerPoint, are not that much different. But there is the big sort of takeaway of this room. Place your speakers close, use active speakers, and save yourself a bunch of money and sort of place a different emphasis economically on where you're going to give your room a premium experience. Let's look at this by chain. In a near field room, the B chain comes out to close to $160,000. But the B chain in a hyper near field room using this philosophy and benchmark, you're in about $30,000. So that's the story. However, there are a couple other ways you could spend your money if you've got some scrap cash. And not to diminish any of these products, but all I'm saying is we want to avoid spending money where we don't have to. But many people are using the PSI Audio AVA C214 active bass absorber. That can be very effective, according to the reports. I've not tried them. Many people are using the Audacy CRBN electrostatic headphones. I've heard them. They sound remarkable. But I'm using my 20-year-old Grado RS2s with large foam cups so that it doesn't bend the top of my ears over, which are about a $1,000 headphone. And to be absolutely truthful, I'm very happy with them. Many people are using a Trinov. It's very effective. I've heard them in rooms. They sound great. But the SonarWorks is a much more affordable way to do it. And it is working incredibly well here. You can build yourself some DIY diffusers to put into your room above the Schroeder frequency. But just remember, if you do what it is that I'm saying here, you really don't involve your room that much. And I use Virtuoso as my binaural renderer, which is great. And version 2 just came out. So here are our conclusions. It's a highly correlated speaker sphere, good dimensional separation, strong imaging, high dynamic range, passive speakers with amps outside the studio equals low studio temperature, low noise floor, easy repair. Hyper near field translates to automotive Atmos systems. Low RT60 helps to have a minimum of electronic room tuning. Standing waves, you have to be very careful about your choice of sub and the location of it. You need a rectangular room, ideally a rear door to function like a bass trap in some way to help exhaust those. The merging technologies uses a Linkwitz Riley crossover, and this room is tuned to 86 for bass management. I use a single sub. It works great. And the result is that at the mix position, standing waves are rendered innocuous, essentially, as we can see by the curve. The isoacoustic pucks are fantastic. And they reduce horizontal smear and spectral masking. Audio network expandability through the Anubis speaker controller with Happy Mark II provides efficient operation, premium sound quality. So what are the weaknesses of the room? Well, it's a one-person mix position. So yeah, I've had 2-3 people in the room. It gets a little tight, but we're swapping in and out of the sweet spot. But the current music business economics makes this size of Atmos studio or a larger size of studio oftentimes hard to justify for independent creators. In doing this, you're going to have a large learning curve. There's going to be, you can expect a significant investment of time, energy, and money, and you're going to have to bring some skills to the table. So in summary, the hyper near field tiny studio philosophy and benchmark introduce durable and adaptable solutions that consider music business economics, which every day push the independent music and sound practitioner, studio owner, and educational institution to do more with less. Now, the only thing I will add is that there's a lot of new development for the equipment that's coming out right now. For example, I've just been made aware of the Audient Aurea, which looks like I haven't worked with it, but it looks like a fantastic audio interface that has speaker control and it imports calibration. My understanding is Universal Audio is now going to work with SonarWorks. So things are moving fast. You can check all of this out on your own, but this is what it is that I've done. And here are some acknowledgments that I'd like to share with you. There's no way that I could have done any of this on my own. I had a lot of discussions with some great people all around the world, and many are in this presentation. So here's a little shout out to all of the people who have been my supporters of this project for my PhD. And here's a couple of images. I'll just give you a little show of what the room looks like. Okay, these are old. The room's, morphed a little bit from here, but this is the depth of COVID, just showing you what it's like to be in the pit of making a room like this. You can see that EDAC connector down to the left, how I had to solder in the center. There, look at that sub. That's amazing. Paul Barton, you're a genius. 4 inches deep, 10-inch speaker, that thing. And look at the chassis. It's elegant. Paul recommended these. These are indoor-outdoor PSB speakers on the lower left corner. They look fantastic. And they hang and can be angled beautifully. You can see the PSB speakers. There's the ISO acoustic pucks. And there are in the lower right side, my ARC amplifiers, soon to be replaced by the Brystons. Quality Nutric connectors, good quality wire, good quality soldering gun. I used a patch bay, which I bought off of eBay. So that's at the center. A lot of measuring. It was a snake pit actually for months. But anyway, there you have it. That's what I've been up to. So I'm just going to stop my screen share and we can talk.
Excellent presentation. Really well done. Just seeing what we've got here. If anybody has any specific questions, just click on the question mark at the bottom of your screen. It's blue, and you can put them in there. We'll deal with those. We've got a few minutes left. Just a couple of questions that I have of Paul.
Yes.
We were talking about the Bryston power amps when James Tanner offered those to you, and I'm just wondering how that's worked out. How was the installation, and what are the results been?
I still don't have them. They're the brand new beta test design. I've read the spec sheets on them, but I am anxiously awaiting. I've placed my purchase order, and so they are yet to come. I can't wait.
Yeah, they make incredible products, and good Canadian company, good family. So that'll be very interesting to see. The next question, I guess, is I mentioned before that at the end of this, people should develop a to-do list. So I'm just wondering if you had to name 3 or 4 things that people should think about doing in the next week, let's say, assuming they're serious about putting in a Dolby Atmos studio.
Okay, well, the first thing is review from the PowerPoint. The second thing is do not buy any equipment until you learn Dart and you design your room virtually in Dart and you figure out exactly how much power, what kind of speakers you want to put in. Design the room virtually. Make sure that you have the appropriate shape, the geometry, the room size, etc., etc. And then buy your equipment. That is the way to do it. When I did this, I got lucky. I went into Dave at Long and McQuaid and I said, hey, I got this crazy idea. I want to build a really small Atmos room, but based on my experience of 5.1 work, I worked in 5.1 doing broadcast and music for 15 years. So I was confident the format would work in this size of room. But I went out and I bought all the merging stuff, bought all the power amps before I'd done it in Dart. And I realized, holy gee, did I ever get lucky, because it's working. But I could have spent so much money on the wrong stuff. So that's the very first thing. Research, buy your equipment second, and get everything ready to go before you build. And psychologically prepare for the work ahead. It's involved, but the payoff is unbelievable. This room sounds great, and I'm so inspired to create in it.
In figuring out where to buy the software and hardware you need, how do you do that? How do you decide where to go? Which company you should deal with, where you should buy the things that you need?
Well, again, I go back to my philosophy. I basically wanted to make environmentally based decisions, buy local where I could. So being in Canada, Bryston is a no-brainer. PSBs were a no-brainer. Merging, I bought that because of the environmental footprint and because of the expandability, but also the Anubis is kind of renowned right now to be the best speaker controller available for Atmos. It is so flexible, it's sturdy, it's reliable, it's really great. So I just really wanted to make sure that the audio hardware that I bought was going to stand the test of time. And that's an environmental purchase. I don't like buying something that gives me buyer's remorse 2 years later and I have to sell it at a loss, or sometimes it expires because it wasn't made well and it goes into electronic waste. I really want to prioritize premium quality products. So just work with your local retailer. Long McQuaid in Canada is great, but in other countries, you have to kind of source out your own retailers.
Excellent. I have a couple of questions that came up here. When you say a single sweet spot, how big is it? And then the second part was, will I need to clamp my head in place? Question mark.
No.
The second part of that was facetious, I assume.
Yeah. Well, that's what everybody says. No. You know what? You can get a lovely immersive experience in this room in about a 4-foot radius. You don't have to clamp your head into place. It's pretty forgiving, believe it or not, but it is ideal when you're at the actual measured space. So when people come in and they sit in the spot, I say, okay, here's where your sort of depth alignment should be with the chair. The chair is set to its height. So everybody's a little bit different, but it's not that sort of precise that you're going to lose the sense of apparent source width or listener envelopment. You can be anywhere in that speaker sphere and you're going to get a nice result. But at the sweet spot, that's where the room is spectrally incredibly flat.
Excellent. Yeah, we don't recommend head clamping as a technique for sure. And then I've got what really about LUFS? I'm not sure what that question means exactly. Maybe you do.
Okay, yeah. Loudness units, full scale. The bottom line is Dolby wants us to print our mixes at an average level of -18 for music. And they don't want us to have any true peaks that go beyond -1. So what does that tell you? This format offers an awful lot of headroom. Essentially, you've got a differentiation, a delta between true peak and average level of about 17 dB, which it's great. This format that Dolby has come out with is so musical because it's becoming to every genre. I mean, jazz, which loves higher dynamics, classical, which loves higher dynamics. I can listen to hip hop. I can listen to all these other formats, but the dimension is so much big and the dynamic range is so much bigger. So why is this essential with regards to reference level? There is a sweet playback level, and I've kind of found it for my taste and my room that 77 dB allows me to very naturally place a mix at -18. And that's important because if you listen too loud, you will probably mix a little quietly. If you listen too quietly, you'll mix louder. And also, you want to make sure that the bass response of the room is right with regards to the Fletcher-Munson curve and our ears. And so that's why we pinked at 77, because that's my room volume. And for everybody, please be very aware of adopting a room level and sticking to it, because you learn it intuitively the longer you work at that level. And you can get to be predictive about levels. And you can know what 77 feels like. You can know what 82 feels like. You can know what 85 feels like. So the calibration in the Anubis is fantastic this way. And I'm calibrated that I know exactly what level I'm listening to. And the other thing I will say is that mono has never been more important than it is with Atmos. The Anubis gives me the ability to scale my mix from 7.1.4 to 7.1 to 5.1 to to stereo and to mono to make sure that the proximity and the perspectives of all of the instrumental relationships in my spatial orchestration and my staging are, those relationships have to stay as, relative, as closely as possible between mono and 7.1.4. And that's why a great speaker controller is what you need to have to be able to get effective translation. I'm constantly scaling between mono and 7.1 and 7.4 to make sure that I'm getting sturdy readings and my mix is staying glued together like a tight fist. Even without compression, you can do so much with your own sort of clip gaining and level matching.
Excellent. Another question here. What about sitting versus standing at mix position?
Well, sitting is the new smoking disease. So I highly espouse the notion of standing and physically moving. But let's think of it this way. This is a question that relates to body anatomy. Atmos is induced into the body through the ears, but also through the skin, somatically, through the shape of our head, the shape of our ears. So there's a biological way that we induce. What I'm saying is that that LFE in this room is really close to my feet, and it's close to my chest cavity when I'm sitting. The chest cavity is our biggest sort of biological cavity, and it really reads with regards to kick drums and bass when you start to feel it in your abdomen. So think about your relationship of your body anatomically to the speaker sphere, and your answers will come to you as to where it's best for you to situate yourself. And one other thing I will remind everybody, any low frequency response below 20 hertz is not capable of being induced through the ears. That only enters the body somatically through skin and our overall anatomy. And on that note, one thing to also understand with regards to this induction of bass frequencies, our ears are not able to discern location below about 100 hertz, a little, maybe between 180, but below 80, no. And that's why I advocate for one subwoofer that is essentially creating an omnidirectional sort of monophonic sense of bass frequencies below, in my room, 86 hertz through the LFE. And the bass management is very, very important. So this is the problem area when you build a room like this. What are you going to do below about 130 hertz? And that's where you're going to have to spend all of your energy. And I hope that some of the things I've shared here help you to make correct decisions about that.
Excellent. Next question. Were there any changes required to the room construction, i.e. drywall, windows, etc.?
No. And that is one thing I want to be straight up with. This room was a well-functioning 5.1 small space where for 15 years I generated broadcast in mixes for television, et cetera, that I heard back on broadcasters. I've mixed records, even mastered in it. So I knew that the room was capable. So my economic projections do not include construction like that. So if you are in a blank space, what you can do from this presentation is take away the dimensions and those sort of attributes, if you will, and then the qualities that are involved in terms of implementing the actual equipment into the room and create your room. But you're not going to get these results if you are not working in a rectangular space. And I would strongly endorse having that door at the back of the room, which I keep open.
Excellent. And final question here. How is room bleed at mixing level, 77 dB? Any complaints from the neighbors?
No, and this is beautiful. I live in a semi-detached home because you are in such close proximity. Doesn't take much energy to get 77 dB to the ear. My wife, she's an artist and she can work upstairs, on the second floor of the house, and she really doesn't hear it. Maybe a little bit of bass leaks through, but no problems with the neighbors on the other side. I did locate the studio on the exterior wall, not the interior joint wall. So there's a lot of benefits to placing the speaker so close. Saves you a ton of money, and it's easy on your neighbors.
Excellent. So we're going to wrap it up here shortly. I want to thank Paul for his time today and all the preparation that he's put into this presentation. And I certainly want to thank all of you for coming. It's quite a list of people. It's like a who's who of the Canadian recording industry just in the attendees today. In the chat, I did put Paul's LinkedIn URL, so you can go there and have a look at his background. But also, again, I'm taking liberties here, but I'm assuming if you want to know more, you can send Paul a LinkedIn message, and he'll, especially if you start a studio and you get halfway into it, say, "Oh God, now I got questions." So I think Paul will be great with that, and I think LinkedIn is a good method for that. So yes, I'm going to just yeah, it's been a great session today. I'm just going to stop recording.